Hello, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alan Kearns. I want to welcome you to our webinar today and glad to have you all here. And I don't know how many of you have joined a webinar today, but we'll do some sort of a little bit of housekeeping in a minute, but I want to welcome you as part of our CareerClass series with the Chemical Institute of Canada. Being involved with you guys as an official partner. We're really excited about our new partnership with you, and some of you may not be familiar with the relationship we have, so maybe I'll take a minute to explain that in a minute. But first of all, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So for some of you, this will be a first time for webinar. For many of you, it's probably old hat. So for those that are old hat, it'll just be a reminder, but also how you can participate in today's webinar. A couple of quick things. My name is Alan Kearns, and I'm going to be leading today's webinar, and I'm going to be sharing with you my perspective around managing a career and being proactive in today's marketplace and how important that is. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about your three-dimensional brand and sharing with you some of the best practices around branding and around your career and managing your career and how to be proactively thinking about yourself and thinking about how to use the digital media, and particularly social media, to present your message. So a couple of quick things. From a perspective of today, there's different ways of participating. Number one is in how many of you are tweet? How many of you have a Twitter account and tweet? Okay, put up your hands, those of you that are doing that. Okay, great, excellent. So feel free to hashtag anything today from the conversation, hashtag CareerJoy or hashtag CareerClass. Also, put up your hands, those of you that are on LinkedIn. How many of you are actively involved on LinkedIn? I'm going to be sharing with you. Great. Okay, good. So another way to participate today, too, by the way, is we'll be sharing with you some of the best practices around LinkedIn, but I also will be enabling you to connect with me on LinkedIn and to share some of your perspectives. Also, feel free to follow me on Twitter, and there's my email, alan@careerjoy, and our site. So if you have questions beyond today, we'll have an opportunity of sharing that. But also at about the 45-minute mark or so, or 40-minute mark, we'll have an opportunity of opening up some specific questions about your situation or about some of the things we're going to cover today. So what am I going to cover today? Well, really, I'm going to cover the core elements of how to leverage social media and how to leverage technology and how to think about yourself as a brand. And I'm going to share with you some, 3 or 4 reasons why it's important. And I'm going to share with you some of the core principles, and then I'm going to share with you some practical examples, real-time examples of what I'm talking about. So often people ask me, where did Career Joy came from? What do I mean by that? And I think it relates to our conversation today. And big picture, one of the reasons I think that your industry has decided to partner with us and to provide career coaching to you as alumni and as part of the industry is because a career is what I love this definition: a person's progress or general course of action through life or through a phase of life, as in some profession or undertaking. And I think we're moving away from this idea that when you had a career in the past, you sort of graduated and your career kind of took you to this idea of a course of action. And really one of the courses of actions is really to be managing your career. And the concept of joy means, can you take some sort of pleasure or interest or delight and be valued. And I think when you combine those two things, a kind of a trajectory where you want to go, a growth within that trajectory, and then some sort of a reason for doing it beyond just money, then I think this is, to me, the whole principle of what we do. Now, from a perspective of the work we do, we also work with a number of different companies that engage us to work with their employees. So I'm sharing this perspective because we do career and leadership coaching both with individuals who are asking the what's next and strategy questions of where they want to go, but also a number of organizations bring us in to help their leaders and help their employees to be more effective and to manage their career in a more perfect way. And they can vary from public sector, private sector, large, small, right across the country. So you're probably here today, obviously, because you're thinking about the questions you have and thinking about what's going on, what about LinkedIn, or what about Facebook, or what about Twitter, or what about branding? I hear a lot about branding. What does that mean to me? So just before we sort of go into the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today, I want you to take a minute just to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from the webinar. So just take a minute in the question box there and just introduce yourself, where you're coming from on the webinar, and that we'll see sort of your name and where you're coming from. And that, by the way, in the question box here is totally confidential, so I'm the only one who can see that. But it'd be great for you just to share where you're joining us from the webinar today in the question box there, so we can sort of see how far we're going. All right, let's see who the farthest is. Yeah, we've got people from London, from Toronto, from Indiana. That's the farthest so far. From Toronto again, Newmarket, Ottawa, McGill. Okay, great. Right across. Yes, awesome. Okay, good, great, excellent. Well, it's good to see a variety, and also as we go through today, you'll have the opportunity of asking questions and making comments in that particular box. Another person from Montreal. Great. All right. So this is social media explained. This is everything you need to know in one slide from today. So Twitter, I need to pee. Facebook, I peed. YouTube, look at me, I'm peeing. LinkedIn, I'm good at peeing, the validation. So it's interesting how we're seeing all of these kind of tools that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Really, I mean, LinkedIn was just relatively new. Twitter didn't exist 5 years ago. Facebook obviously did exist, but in a very peripheral way. And YouTube obviously was just emerging. So it's amazing how all of these tools that were very peripheral and now mainstream. And I'll kind of show you another example of this too, by the way. This is another vintage, what I call vintage social media. So remember when Pinterest was, you put it on your board, and YouTube was you looked out the window, and LinkedIn was your Rolodex. Facebook was your address book, and Skype was your phone, and Twitter was your notepad, right? So what's interesting about that is I always say that the things that we're dealing with today are really not new things. They're really very old things that just have new applications. So I think that's kind of interesting to kind of think about that as it relates to our discussion today. So I think another sort of premise around social media and as it relates to your branding is, really the definition of social is moving from marketing from a monologue to a dialogue. Moving from marketing from a monologue to dialogue. How many of you have put a rating on a product or service that you've bought online? Put up your hands, those of you that have put a rating on a product or service that they've either on Amazon or something like that, right? And how many of you would be resistant to purchasing something without some sort of a rating, not from the but from the creator of the product, but from the people who've used it? So we as consumers are moving away from where companies can have these big ads and tell us how great their product is, to now we go, I don't really care what you say. I'm going to look online and see what people own the product. I'm currently sort of looking for another car, and I was on AutoTrader, and even I noticed how AutoTrader has moved from just telling you about the car and the price and jobs and searching it to actually be able to look at how other people rate that particular car and their experience with that car in a number of categories. So this is happening across every single category of our society, and including it's happening with employers and employees. In fact, you may be or may not be familiar with a tool called Glasshouse, where you can actually look at how people that actually work at organizations actually rate working there. Glasshouse is an example of that, where employers are rated anonymously by people who've worked there or users, and LinkedIn is a great example of how people can rate. So we're really moving from this concept of that we all have these needs to know what's important and what's real. Now, as that we have to be connected. All of us have very similar needs in a way, and we just want ways to be able to share that in a way that's trustworthy. So thinking about this concept of 3D, how many of you saw the movie Avatar? Put up your hands, those of you that saw Avatar, the movie. Yeah, a number of you did. Obviously, lots of people did. And what I found interesting about Avatar is, why was it that movie did so well? Well, what James Cameron figured out, a good Canadian he is that he figured out if he could tell the story in a more interesting and engaging way, that we would be more interested in this story. And that's really what each of us have. Each of us has a story to tell about us personally or professionally, and I'm going to speak specifically today about professionally, although I will infer about personally how this impacts things. And I think it's thinking like James Cameron did. He didn't think two-dimensionally about movies anymore. He thinks three-dimensionally. He thinks, how can I use technology to engage and bring people more deeply into my story so that it's stickier, it's more influential, you relate to it more. And that's really what he did with Avatar and the use of technology. And I think it's the same thing. Each of us has a story. How do we use technology to make that story more interesting and more engaging? And there's great research that supports this, that if you think about moving from what I call old thinking, when many of you graduated or in the last few years, that your storytelling vehicle was your resume, and you sent it out and you put it on websites and you connect with people. And now you can increase that perspective by 14 times. Now, how many of you have been told that you need to learn how to sell yourself better? Put up your hands, those of you that have been told in your career, sell yourself better. You need to learn how to sell yourself better. Okay, a number of you have. Now, I'm going to suggest, as it is for many, that many people don't like to be sold. But I'm assuming that many of you like to buy. And so this idea of branding and using technology to tell that story is not about learning how to sell yourself better. That is the big myth. It's actually learning about how to market yourself better, because in today's world, you cannot sell people. People don't get sold. And if you do try to sell somebody, they're going to check you out online. So where does somebody learn how to do this? Where do you learn, how to do a better job of branding yourself, and why is that important? Well, I think it's really a literacy issue. If you said to me now, I don't have an email address, or I don't know how to use email properly, or I don't know how to use Skype, that's a literacy issue. And I think it's the same thing with these things as it relates to managing and branding yourself, that literacy is really key. And Terry O'Reilly understands that in his work around marketing, that his whole show, The Age of Persuasion, the book he does, is all about raising literacy. Why? So that people be more discerning and more empowered over their choices. And I think it's the same thing with our whole CareerClass series, and learning how to market yourself and learning how to use LinkedIn to do this more effectively than you have on your own. So why is this important? Well, we keep hearing about the Great Recession. Well, it's important for a bunch of reasons. So here's sort of the big picture of why I think it's important to be marketing yourself on an ongoing basis, and then seeing ourselves as a brand, and understanding that we don't work for companies anymore. We work for in a global marketplace, of which we happen to be working for a company now. And obviously we all do work for companies, but what I'm saying is very few people are going to be with companies for their entire career. So there's an incredible amount of reset going on, and you see this in the technology sector. You're seeing this in the financial sector, where there's lots and lots of turbulence. You're seeing this in public sector markets, where globally around the world, where there's lots and lots of change, and organizations are restructuring and laying off people and changing things around that. You're seeing this in contracts. How many of you have worked on a contract at some point in your career? Put up your hands, those of you that have worked on some sort of a contract relationship. A number of you, about 25%. And again, this is a whole emerging field that, these employers here, by the way, are the 3 largest employers in the world, one of the 3. And again, they provide employees on a contract basis, and even high-level technical, such as the work that you guys do on a technical basis all over the world. Now, again, these organizations, you're an independent contractor working for them, and you have to have a brand, and this is really important because you're working potentially contract to contract. And we are moving to what I call the entertainment model in work. What does the entertainment model look like? Well, I do a lot of media work, and I was doing a show for one of the networks, and while I was on the show, I was talking to the crew and I said, "What are you guys off to?" And he said, "Well, in a month's time, I don't know, we're off to our next project." I said, "Where is that going to be?" And he said, "Well, no, and we'll sort of see how it goes." So I think this idea that working project to project as a contractor is no longer just in the entertainment industry. It's right across almost every industry. Same with globalization. Another sort of change in the workplace is globalization. How many of you have worked on a project somewhere else other than North America? Put up your hands that have gone and worked on a project globally. Okay. So many of you have done that, right? So international, it's another thing you also want to pay attention to is getting international experience. Super important. I see this over and over again where people are, recognizing that, that you need to get international experience. The other reality is that work can be done anywhere, anytime. So you're finding organizations are recruiting on a global workplace. It's just an interesting stat. There's going to be over 40 million university graduates graduating from universities in China and India in the next couple of years. So more than the entire population of Canada. And again, these are high-end graduates. These are not necessarily strictly doing manufacturing or call center. We're talking about engineers and physicians and all kinds of things, right? So again, a change where work can be done anywhere, anytime, and companies are working on a global basis, no longer just a local basis, and you can be competing against people all over the world in different areas. Another change that's happened is retirement. In 2009, this is a recent study 3 weeks ago from the Globe and Mail, 2009, 55% of Canadians imagining themselves would be retiring at the age of 66. And in 2012, that number has dropped to 27%. So it's a really, really big drop in people imagining themselves retiring, at the age of 66. Now, why will they be working at the age of 66? Well, the number one reason was they enjoy their work. The number two is they wanted to stay mentally active, and then number three was money, and number four was money. It was they didn't think government was going to have enough benefits, and they didn't think they'd have enough cash flow. So another thing that's changing is we're staying in the world of work longer and working longer, and so that's another change where we're working a very long period of time. So it's another reason why your brand and all these elements around this matter. Same thing with the use of technology. Another change is technology, where we're working in a mobile world. Yesterday, I haven't even our Toronto office today, and yesterday I didn't work in the office. I worked off-site, and I was able to do that through my laptop and my phone. I spent the entire day working, but in 3 different places. Again, that changed. So it changed where we do work, and also the 24/7 nature of work. It's also creating a lot of job stress. You're finding people are feeling stressed about this and feeling stressed because they're in demand, but it also creates opportunity to work anywhere, anytime. And again, this whole idea of virtual, that many more people are working from a home office. How many of you work at a home office scenario on a fairly regular basis? Put up your hands, those of you that work at home office fairly regularly. Okay, yeah. So that's another change in work where, typically in the past, you were really restricted to working in a very fixed place. And again, that's a change. Another change in the world of work is what I call the mustard principle. Recently, I was, I was buying some mustard, and this is what it looks like to buy mustard. Now, you might say, what does that have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, first of all, there's a lot of chemicals in mustard, so maybe some of you relate to, and you're in the food industry. But more importantly, this is a great example, very, very tangible example of the world that you and I live in, where there's incredible amount of choices, and the way we make choices as consumers is based upon looking for a very specific response to a need that we have. So when I grew up, there was sort of, I remember in our fridge there was really it was regular mustard and hot mustard, I think. Now you can have literally hundreds of choices, right? So how does that relate? Well, it relates to employers have many, many different choices of how they do work and what they're looking for. It also relates to candidates, to you and people that are in the market. Do you have a brand that sticks up, that's distinctive enough, and very precise? A lot of people, their brand is I'm a chemical engineer, or I'm a project manager. Well, that's a category. That's not a brand. It's like saying I sell mustard, right? So this is another principle that if you don't have a brand, you're not going to separate yourself. And we live in a branded world, for the good and the bad of that, right? So what does all of these changes create? Well, it creates what I call the perfect industrial storm. The perfect industrial storm. When you take all of those things, all of those changes concurrently, what it does is it creates a very different kind of landscape for employers to work in and for individuals to manage their career in, that you're not working probably long-term in an organization. Even if you were working long-term in an organization, you have situations that changes suddenly, and all of a sudden you discover that you're not as valuable as you thought you were. So all of these changes together, and you're going to be working longer. So it creates an industrial storm. And the question, who will thrive in this? Well, it's people like James Cameron who are able to adjust and change and deal with change, and change. And to me, the question is, will you be smart about this, or will you be afraid in these kinds of scenarios? I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and I hadn't seen him in a long time, and he was just turned 40, and he was saying, "Man, it's getting really hard to change." And I said to Warren, Warren, this is what the whole ball game is about. If you don't change in this world, then you are going to have a really difficult time when all of these things are happening concurrently. And I've been in the people business for about 20 years now, and I've never seen a time when there's been as much concurrent change going on in all sectors and all areas at the same time. So it's funny, I was in Victoria speaking at a conference, and while I was out there, it was Halloween, and I saw these Smarties, right? And it's like the scary version or the smart version. And I think, to me, this idea of being smart about this is really key. So what are the principles around thinking about your 3D? And I'm going to show you some examples. Well, number one, some myths around this is it's a new idea. Social media and this ability to connect and this idea of us to share who's good at what we do. When we went to get water at some point back in the history, and people still do this today, people say, who's good at this? Who do you know that's good at this? And we share with each other. Who's good at that? Around the water cooler. We have the water cooler today. We'll say, I'm looking for a good mechanic. I'm looking for a good project manager. Who's good at this? It's not a new idea, this whole concept of sharing ideas and sharing leads socially. Myth, you should know how to do this. I think understanding how to use all these tools is kind of like saying you should know how to scuba dive. You need training. My son last year took training to learn how to scuba dive, and he's a good swimmer and he's smart, but he needs to learn how to do it. Another myth around this is complicated. Oh boy, it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. Again, I think it's complex, but it's not complicated. It's actually quite simple in many ways. Another myth around this is a magic bullet. I think many people think if I just get 5,000 followers on LinkedIn, or if I just get 10,000 followers on Twitter or whatever, then I'm going to have all kinds of opportunity come my way. And again, I don't think it's quite like that. Another myth around this is you should be able to do this on your own, and I think that's no longer true. That it's the idea that we are constantly building our career. Here's a big myth. People say to me, this takes time, and I'm so busy, Alan, I don't have time to be worrying about this stuff. You know what? One of the best principles I can leave you today is what I call the 10-minute principle. Each of us has 10 minutes a day, every single day of our lives, that we could commit to, during the week, 5 days a week. If you could commit 10 minutes a day to work on your personal brand, then guess what? When you have a need, first of all, you'll be amazed what kind of opportunities will come your way that you won't have to look for, that people start seeking you out. And the second thing you'll find is, if you did have a need, let's say there was a restructuring, you determined you wanted to leave the company, it'll take you a lot less time to find a better opportunity and to work with recruiters and things like that. So to me, spending 10 minutes on this a day is really like staying in shape. I'm a runner, so tonight I'm going to go for a run. And I recognize that's going to take about an hour of my life. And I do that, let's say 4 times a week, but I recognize the value of that, right? And it's a priority for me. And so I really want you to think about this concept of managing your brand to use the 10-minute rule a day, 5 days a week, or 3 to 5 days a week. Another myth around is you should follow rules. And this is my dog in a park where there's nobody there, and you're not allowed to bring your dog, supposedly, right? So again, what rules do you follow, and what rules shouldn't you follow? Again, I'm not talking about moral rules or ethical rules. I'm talking about rules we're changing, right? So what's the kind of the key principles around personal branding and 3D branding? Well, number one, you have a story, and it's unique and very personal. So let me give you an example of this. And this is an example from a taxi driver, right? Now, many people will say, what do you do for a living? And they'll say, I drive a taxi. Now, what do you notice? Just put a couple of comments. What do you notice about this taxi driver that you see right here on this slide? Tell me a bit about who this taxi driver is, do you think, when you look at this slide? So what's the story that this taxi driver is telling you? Just put your comments in the answer box there. Yep, that he's innovative, absolutely. Yep. Risk taker, takes pride. Yeah, somebody says unique, take pride. Yeah, absolutely. Attracts attention. It's interesting. I took this picture. My daughter was just coming home from France, and I picked her up at the airport. She was coming through Ottawa, so we picked her up there. And what's interesting is this taxi driver, as you've seen, different, specialized, bigger, better, differentiated himself or herself in a commoditized market. Now, Does that person get you any faster from point A to point B? Not necessarily. But it's interesting, when I presented this slide, by the way, in Ottawa, I asked people in the room, how many people have seen this taxi? And you know what? About 60% of the room had seen this taxi. Now, if I asked them, how many of you have seen a black taxi in Ottawa with the number, the number of the taxi is 385, I don't think one person would be able to put up their hand. So this person is using this concept of recognizing that they have a unique story to tell, and it's not the same as anyone else's story. See, the biggest danger that every single professional has right today is being commoditized. And by the way, if I can commoditize you in your profession, then I can get you for a cheaper rate. I don't have to pay you as much. And so the number one thing to remember is, what's your story, and it's unique and personal. So let me give you another example of this. So let's talk about these three brands and their story. So let's talk about, what is the Starbucks story? What's the story that what's Starbucks identity when you think about this as a consumer? So let's use what's Starbucks example? What's the Starbucks story? What's, from your perspective as a consumer, what does Starbucks have to tell us? Okay, yeah, it's personalized, absolutely. Yeah. The third place, for sure. It's unique. Okay. Yeah. Expensive coffee, absolutely. Gourmet, yep. Now, what about, what is the Tim Hortons story? What is the Tim Hortons brand or story? What is it, the thing that their story that's unique? What's the Tim Hortons story? Yeah, the Tim Hortons story is the double-double. Yeah, when you think about the difference between Tim Hortons and Starbucks, how would you describe the difference of them? Well, Starbucks, as you've described here, is lower price, high volume is the Tim Hortons, and Starbucks is the higher price, right? But yeah, and if somebody says that that Starbucks is cheap, Tim Hortons is cheaper, but not necessarily unique. But I think they have actually created their own example of a product that's commoditized. You think about coffee. Coffee is cocoa beans and hot water and milk and sugar. There's examples of two brands that have taken commodities. It literally is, coffee is one of the commodity things, right? People will measure this scenario that, and so this is an example. In a commoditized product, they've created one case, Starbucks brand, the billion-dollar global brand, and then a Tim Hortons example, incredible Canadian brand, right? So they have a unique story to tell, and see how quickly you can respond to that story, and you know that story. Now, what about Don Cherry? What's Don Cherry's story? By the way, somebody asked me if I can send him the presentation today. We're recording this, and we're going to post it to YouTube, and we'll send you out a link afterwards, and you can watch it on YouTube. So what's the Don Cherry story? What's Don Cherry's brand from your perspective? Yeah, he's loud, absolutely. Obtrusive, yeah. What else is Don Cherry's story? Canadian, absolutely. Yeah, Hockey Night in Canada. Okay. What's tacky? Yeah. What about Ron MacLean? What's Ron MacLean's story? What's the thing that makes Ron MacLean unique? What's the Ron MacLean story? Yeah, class act. Yeah. So again, another example, completely different people, but they have a unique story to tell. You can think away that Don Cherry and Ron MacLean responds. And you think about the Eatons. Eatons at one point was bigger than all of these organizations together combined. But even Eatons understood, if you look at this picture I'm showing you, it's from 1913. It's a catalog, and it was the original social media, right? Think about, catalog, what it does. It tells a story. You could favorite the page. You could share it with your friends, and you could order it, and stuff would come to your site. So your story, is it unique? What's your unique story? And again, whether it's a taxi driver or a media personality or a coffee company, you have to think like a product. You have to think like a product. And products do these things really well. They know who their story is really clearly. They know where their market is really specifically. They know how to market themselves, and they know how to evolve. So my question is, what's your story? Really your story is your brand. So again, by the way, saying I am a chemical engineer is not a story. That's like saying I sell coffee beans, right? That's not the story. That's the commodity. So again, what's your unique story? The second thing is you want to use technology to enable people to tell it, to engage in that story. And why is that important? Because it's not so much what you say, but it's what would Google say. What would Google say? You know, when we think about this, using technology to tell a story has been around since the beginning of time. This is Amazon 1.0. This is Facebook 1.0. You know, in the Stone Age, what did people write on? Walls. How many of you in the last 24 hours written on a wall? This is the tablet 1.0. Moses knew about the tablet. This is the Twitter 1.0. You know, we've been able to sum up, you know, stories and lives and stories, example, on a tombstone, right? And so to me, using technology to tell that story is really, really key. So let's look at the final idea, and then I'm going to show some examples. And then the third piece of this is to tell your story continuously, confidently, and consistently. To be doing this on an interesting and engaging way. To standing out in the market, right? So know your story, use technology to tell your story, and then you need to market your story on a consistent and confident continual basis. So let's show you some examples of this. Why this is important? Well, I'll share with you, you know what I said earlier, it's not so much what you say, it's what will Google say. You know, recently a gentleman had an unfortunate incident on a flight. In fact, it happened with two executives at, in fact, I'll pull that one up as a better, more relevant example. You know, I'll show you a relevant example is a RIM exec who was pulled off a plane. And now anytime you search this gentleman's name, you'll find that he's having a hard time getting work. Why? Because whatever he did in his private life on a plane, on a trip on behalf of RIM, you know, showed up online, right? So this is an example of this where, you know, I'm not making a comment about him specifically, but I am sharing with you that when you're out there, whatever you do now is going to be tracked and seen online, right? So it's not so much what you say you do, it's what will Google say you do. So we're living in an age where we're leaving a digital footprint for both in good and not so good if we make poor choices, right? Now, let's look at the stats, the research around this. And so this is from a 2012 study looking at recruiters, and it asked them to, you know, where is the best place to do recruiting? You know, where do you find your best candidates? So here's this interesting research around this. You know, 92% of recruiters, by the way, and recruiters in organizations, are using some sort of a social media to recruit. The number one recruiting site they use is LinkedIn, followed by Facebook, followed by Twitter, and then blogs, and then YouTube. Interesting enough, YouTube has 19%. I know you think, what, YouTube? I'm going to show you an example where I think this is going, even on YouTube, where I really think I'll share with you where I think it's going that way. So 93% of employers using LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and then blogs. How many of you blog on a regular basis, or do any of you blog on a regular basis? You know, blogging is a great way, by the way, what I call content marketing, where you're writing and creating ideas, you know, to add value in your organization or in your industry. So what are the impacts of social recruiting? So what's this? So number one, lots of people are using it, but what's the impact? Well, from a timing perspective, time to hire, it's increased in 14% of the cases and decreased time to hire in 21% of the cases and stayed the same, about 38%. So the overall impact of social media actually is to slow down hiring a little bit, right? But here's the benefits to most employers when it comes to social media. The candidate quality has gone up by 43%. And only a 3% decrease. So substantive increase in candidate quality. And the other thing it's done is a substantive increase, a 50% increase in quantity. And the other benefit is a 31% increase in employee referrals. So you end up with much higher quality, much more volume, and much more trusted referrals through social media. And LinkedIn, I'll show you in a minute, as an example how that works. Getting hired. So on the hiring side, individuals saying 73% of respondents indicated that they have successfully hired through social media, aka they've bypassed the traditional formats of posting to job boards and things like that, and they've gone social. They've posted it on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. They've not gone to the traditional platforms. And the number one platform, by the way, is 89% have used LinkedIn, followed by Facebook at 25%. So the stats are there to support this is where the market's going. You know, it's interesting. I just read this really interesting little thing on on dragonflies, and they have the highest. Interesting, who knew? Dragonflies are the best hunters in all the animal kingdom. They have a 95% success rate in hunting. And one of the principles of the research is why they're so successful, because they anticipate where things are going, not where they are. So this is a very interesting principle, are anticipating where it's going. So the evidence certainly supports this. Now, on the resume side, by the way, I think there's still a place for resumes, but one of the things I'll encourage you to think about is some examples of resumes that are much more creative, that literally are outside the box. So this person here created a resume that that you could actually put it together in a box format, right? So, you know, different ways of telling your story. Here's another person. This might be more like a scientific resume. He used Google Analytics to share his experience in the online industry and what he's done. The percentage of budgets approved at first shot, 73%, right? And then there's example Wild West quotas. So here's an example where you're seeing much more variances of resumes. Here's another example of a resume that's done in an infographic example, right? So all of these, by the way, are examples of what I call the taxi principle, that they're telling this story in a way that's far more distinctive than most of everyone else who still tells the story in the same way, right? So LinkedIn, here I'm going to show you my LinkedIn profile. Now, when you look at my profile, what is the very first thing that you notice on my profile? What's the very first thing that you notice when you look at my profile here online? And I'm using my profile because I have approval to use my profile. So I'm not here to focus on me, but I want clean picture, right? So what's interesting about this is the most important thing you need to focus on in your LinkedIn profile, the number one thing you need to focus on is your picture. You know, I've seen many, many examples of professionals who are really good at what they do, who their picture is either it looks like they're hungover, or it's, you know, them holding their dog, or, you know, they've just come back from a run or something. Or I've seen a recruiter. So I know of a recruiter on LinkedIn who's actually a very good recruiter who's wearing sunglasses. Now, if you saw a recruiter with sunglasses on that reached out to you and you saw that they'd reached out to you for a job opportunity and they had sunglasses on their profile, what would that say to you? Potentially your resistance might be if you've gotten a recruiter reach out to you and you checked them out on LinkedIn and you looked at their background and they're wearing sunglasses. What might that say to you as a candidate? Right, they're a bit shady. That may not be trustworthy, right? So having a good picture is really, really key. And then the next thing you want to be telling is here as who I am, where I work. And in my case, I'm telling you that I'm open to invites. Why am I saying that? Because as I mentioned earlier, that I am open to invites. That you know, I really believe in the power of the network. And the more people that I'm connected to, the more people I can help. The same thing with you. That the more people you're connected to in your network, the more opportunities that you can connect others to, and you can add real value. So I'll send you my LinkedIn, by the way. If you're not connected to me with my email, then feel free to connect with me, and I'll absolutely accept it, right? So again, the quality and the depth of your connections is really key. Then I tell you where I work and what I do. Then now my activity page is it'll show my activity page. Now, activity is important because it tells you what's going on in my profile. Now, I don't know how many of you use that on a fairly basis, but what happens is when you post information in your activity, it shows up in other people's profiles. So, you know, using your activity page on an ongoing basis is really key. And you could be posting blogs or ideas or sharing concepts like this. So again, why is that important? Because it shows up in other people's feeds and it helps your network. And then you have a summary page. Now, again, the summary is like your resume, but in a short format, right? So again, do you have a good summary? Is it telling about your story in an interesting and engaging way, a short way, right? Then some of your presentations, if you want to do that. Now you add experience. So here's my experience, and I tell you a little bit about my experience, where I've worked and what I'm doing, right? how many of you have recommendations on your profile? Put up your hands, those of you that have recommendations on your profile. A number of you do. Now, why are recommendations important? Because we talked about earlier that it's not what I say about me. It's what other people say about me. If you're looking for a coach or you're looking for whatever it may be, it's not so much what you say about yourself, it's actually what other people say about you. And by getting third-party validation, if I'm looking at two candidates and I'm looking at their profiles and one person has a bunch of recommendations on them, and the other person has no recommendations, and that's kind of like when you're looking at a product or a hotel or a restaurant. One that has a lot more recommendations you might be more likely to choose, right? So recommendations are key, and then where you worked. Then honors, any honors, awards, or publications you have. Skills endorsements. There's another tool that that people have just really in the last 6 months that LinkedIn is utilizing. Why are skills and expertise important? Because what's happening is that you're finding that LinkedIn is becoming so popular and there's so many people on it that to make it more rigorous in the ability for us to search you or a recruiter to search you, they're going to be looking at not only your background and your education, your experience and all that sort of stuff, but also your skills and how you're weighted. Because when you search under the people box, just in the top right, and if I was to search for leadership development coaches, that a person with more endorsements and more recommendations will come up at a higher level within the search engine of LinkedIn. So skills and expertise are important because if a recruiter or an HR person or you want to be noticed, then you want to get people to validate your skills and expertise. Now, the skills and expertise, part of the challenge around that, by the way, is that it's harder to necessarily measure how accurate that is, but the more volume there is, the more chances that it's true, right? So skills and expertise are important, and where it comes up to is, example, if you look at a person's profile, you'll see, does this person have these skills or expertise? When you look at a person's profile, it asks you in your connection to, and again, my recommendation here is obviously don't endorse somebody unless you have an idea that they have those skills, right? So skills and expertise are important. Make sure that you've looked at your skills and expertise. Make sure you've got an updated version of that, of the skills that you have, right? And then your education, obviously, and any other background you have. So that is an example of your profile and making sure it's rigorous and well thought out. And again, if you get somebody who just has a lot, an average picture, not a lot of information, not a lot of activity on their site, on their personal branding site, versus getting somebody else who's got a very active profile, right? So now there's a great tool, by the way, if you want to connect your LinkedIn profile to to make a more visual resume, and this is called the Reviewit. It's free, and it takes all the content from your LinkedIn bio and it actually incorporates in a lovely format into a lovely kind of a really nice way to. So again, you can use this to incorporate more visually, again, a resume that you can send out or as part of your branding thing. I love this. It's job duties. It does it in a format and in pastimes. I love that too. So again, another visual way to tell your story. Now, by the way, I looked on the Chemical Institute Canada. There's different groups on there, so I looked on, and there's different ones, and there's all kinds of associations that you might want to think about as far as groups online. So groups are pretty powerful from a perspective of joining them. Now, I'm not a member of your particular group, so I'll show you an example where I am a member of a group. So we'll go to like the Canadian Marketing Association, and again, you can look in different groups and you can look at different activities going on there. Now that one's not a good example because it doesn't have jobs on it, but I'll give you another example of one that does have a job on it. We'll go down to this one, Canadian Professional Sales Association. And here is examples. The Canadian Professional Sales Association, it has a job group, right? So under there, again, different groups have different jobs. And this is, again, where more and more companies are utilizing LinkedIn to post positions. So by the way, if you're a manager, it's a great way to recruit people. So let's just an example, technical sales representation in the Calgary area. So what's interesting about this is it posts the job, which is fine. We all know that. But what's powerful about this is it actually tells you who posted it. And it tells me that Shauna Giltner posted this job. And what's neat about that is I can connect to Shauna and start the conversation before I even apply. It also tells me here that 10 people have applied for this job. So, example, in the past, you would only know about the job, but you wouldn't really know who's posting the job. So this is a good example of jobs that are that you can really drill down in really nicely in LinkedIn on the groups. The other interesting thing about groups is to be active in them. Again, if you want to be, participating in conversations and participating in dialogue, or you want to even do some research. I know many people go to their groups and say, hey, I'm working on this specific problem. Where do I find information? And again, this is a good example of, how you can use these groups to build your network. Also members. When you join a group, it tells you who's the member. So again, if you're searching a particular, want to be more connected in different ways. So this is another way to be more connected through groups. Because if you're in the same group, you can also connect to members on that group or find out about them. So many people are wanting to know, but who's who. Again, groups are great that way. So that's LinkedIn at a sort of a high level. CareerJoy. So from a perspective of online Facebook, my advice around Facebook, by the way, is to think of Facebook as think of it more as I would lock my personal page down, and you can like company pages. So my advice around for Facebook is lock it down so that only that I can, if I'm a friend of yours, that I can see your profile. But you can use it to track companies. So example, I gave an example of Detroit as an example, or Deloitte rather, not Detroit, Deloitte as an example. So let's say you want to, again, follow up with companies, see what's going on in the company, research them. You can follow them, you can like them. And when you like them, you can find out opportunities that are coming up that they might post first to their Facebook page before they go anywhere else. So they might post it to Facebook, then post it to LinkedIn. And again, if you're liking their page, you're tracking them, right? And also you can learn a lot about company on their pages. So I use Facebook from an employer's perspective to build a corporate brand, but I lock it down on my personal side and use LinkedIn as my professional side. Why? Because you don't want different things on there. And I mentioned earlier about YouTube. So let me show you this example here. Just listen for a minute.
I produced this video because, let's face it, communications have changed. There's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned pen and paper, but it's evolved into something far more exciting and accessible. On top of that, I'm a PR practitioner, and a good one at that. Spinning words and narrative is what I'm trained to do. This is me. Hi, I'm Graham Anthony, and welcome to my Curriculum Vitae interactive video. I produced this video because, let's face it, communications have changed. There's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned pen and paper, but it's evolved into something far more exciting and accessible. On top of that, I'm a PR practitioner, and a good one at that. Spinning words and narrative is what I'm trained to do. This is me in my natural habitat. 100% transparent. You might not warm to what you see initially, but on the other hand, I can be whatever you need me to be. To find out more, click on one of the links.
So as I mentioned earlier, why is that important? Because I think where we're heading to is you're not only going to have your LinkedIn, but you're also going to have a little mini video. I suspect in the next 2 to 5 years that every single person is going to have their own online video of their documentary, right? So of their scenario. So this is another example of, again, now what's interesting about that is he had 232,000 people watch that video. It was an article in the BBC. He had 8 job offers, I think, or something like some crazy amount, right? So example, he could be sending out resumes, or he could do this, right? So again, I know that you might thinking, oh, that may not work in my situation. I get it. May not work in certain scenarios, but it's an example of maybe there's a way you can use that to tell your story and to think about your story, right? Now, let me show you another example of Twitter. So let's look at Chris Hadfield. How many of you are following Chris Hadfield on Twitter? Put up your hands, those of you that are following him. What's interesting about Chris Hadfield, Hadfield has just done an amazing job of using Twitter to tell his story. Not just the story of the work he's doing on behalf of the International Space Station, but to build a relationship with a group of people. And again, what I notice about him, he's doing a tremendous job of telling information but also making it interesting and also adding a personal flavor to this. And now again, you don't have to have 600,000 followers, but the principles that he's using anyone can use. And so when he's tweeting things, he'll often say, and he does this every morning, he does this consistently, "Good morning, Earth," and then he says what he's going to be doing. Then he shows you a picture of what he's doing, and then he might tell you another picture. And at the end of the day, he usually scenarios. So he does lots of things, but typically he has a, he's often sharing pictures. And what's interesting is there's a really interesting article in the, I'll just pull it up here in, yeah. So there's an interesting article in The Guardian about Chris Hadfield, and it's called "The Superstar Astronaut Taking Social Media by Storm." Right. So here's a good example of, Chris Hadfield could be up there doing his thing, and really, not really, we may not be bothered about it, but he is building his own brand. That he was previously unknown. In fact, he was, and not only is he building his own brand, but he's sharing the experience he's having with the entire nation, and how much, there's so much value that really he's getting at. And what's interesting about the story I found is that it said a few weeks ago, Chris Hadfield did not generate much name recognition even in his native Canada. And it says the 53-year-old may have been the country's most experienced astronaut, the first Canadian walk in space, a veteran of 2 space shuttles. But few people would have stopped him in the street to ask for an autograph. Then on December 21st, Hadfield arrived and he started tweeting. Right. So there's an example of, what exactly I'm talking about today. That if you use these things, you just never know where that can take you. And so Twitter is something to do, discipline, to be careful about it. I'm thinking of unlike a particular member of Parliament who removed himself from Twitter this year because Twitter was damaging his brand. And in fact, he resigned from Twitter. He resigned from Twitter because when he would have a bit too many drinks, he would say really stupid things. So the principles around 3D branding is, what is your story? What is the story you have to tell? What is that story? How do you use technology to enable and engage and make it social? And then how do you do it consistently, like Chris Hadfield does? That you stay at it. You don't just do it for a little bit and then leave it, get bored of it, right? And you don't overdo it either. I mean, that's the advantage of this idea of consistency. So, as you think about this idea of social media, think about, how to use it from a way of to be opportunistic. And I was in the drugstore and I saw, a place where they were selling, pregnancy tests and condom oil, right? So thinking about opportunism, thinking about preparation as a scout and a cub, thinking about doing this sort of ABCs. Also, another thing I think a principle around social media and your brand is knowing when's enough and not enough. And this is a balance, that you can be so consumed by these things. That's why I love the 10-minute rule game, because after 10 minutes, it's probably enough, right? That's probably enough for a day. I don't think Chris Hadfield spends more than 10 minutes a day on Twitter. I don't think NASA would want him spending 3 hours a day on building his social media brand, right? They're not paying him for that, right? But he is doing, an example, 10 minutes a day. The other neat thing about it is you learn so much, you can meet so many people, you can have a lot of fun with that. And it can be a place of pleasure for you. I think the other reality of your social media is that what I believe is the future belongs to 3-dimensional personal branding, and it leads to more analog in your career. And the best things in life are analog. So what do I mean by that? Is that I think, again, in Chris Hadfield's case, that when he comes back to Earth, well, first of all, he's having more real experiences and real conversations with people. But when he arrives back in Earth, guess how much more people he'll be asked to speak or go to conferences or share ideas or book deals or whatever it might be. And this is my point, is when you do this in a smart way and not be afraid of it, don't be scared of it, don't be afraid of it, is that it's incredible the leverage you can have, and that you'll have more relationships with real people. In social media, it's about being social. It's not about media. Media is just something, the format changes consistently from paper to whatever, from rocks to walls to digital. But the reality is the real benefit is to do this. So my question for you today is, are you coming soon maybe going to start working on this? Now what's interesting about what's on this piece of property right now, by the way, is a for sale sign. And James Cameron says that that this bonus idea that James is part scientist and part artist. That's why he's done so well in his movie business. And I think there is an art and a science to managing your 3D career brand, but you will have some success along the way. So my question is, and we're going to open this up for Q&A, is what is the one takeaway from today that's fresh and healthy that can help you? You've spent, some of you are in the East, so what is, you've spent some of your lunch. My question for you is, what is the one takeaway from today that you think is going to help you? So would you mind sharing that with me in the question box here, an idea that maybe you think you're going to take away with? Now, obviously, I've shared lots of different things today about the changes, about the trends that are going on in the world, and about how to utilize technology. But my question for you is, what is the one idea from today that you think can help you? And I'll share some of that to those, and then we'll open up for questions. But I'd love to share that. Yeah, consistency pays off. Absolutely, Harpreet. Yeah, absolutely. I really believe that too many people look at this as a short-term hit. And again, Don Cherry, Ron McLean, Starbucks, Tim Hortons, Chris Hadfield are all people that have worked at doing this on an ongoing basis. So, but consistency. Yeah. Amir talked about improving my LinkedIn profile. Absolutely. Alexander talked about improving marketing branding online in original fashion is more important than I really thought initially. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah, because again, what's neat about this is when companies Google you, when you're going to opportunities, all of a sudden you've got this well-rounded story to tell that's far more engaging and far more interesting. And again, because of the things I said earlier in our conversation, we're heading into the age of hyper competition. I don't care what profession you're in. It's not going to be easy to be in the bottom 80%. It really isn't. Any different than if I open a coffee store in Toronto. It is incredibly competitive. And if I want to not only protect my business but grow my business, then I need to be thinking of new ways to be telling the story. And also you can just share ideas to your to your community. You can share referrals of opportunities to your network. You can, there's so many benefits that can come out of social media. Beyond just the sort of the hard benefits of growing your career and getting advancement and maybe getting that job you want. And I've also seen that too, by the way, where companies now are even not only when they interview, sometimes they're making decisions based upon the person's influence. So they're actually going, I've seen that in the marketing industry, they're actually hiring, I've seen examples of that they've compared the kind of the influence that people have externally to their work and hire people based on that too, right? So the biggest takeaway is the 10-minute a day like exercise program. Yeah, and the example of the story versus commodity is not new, but hit me more this time. Okay, great, yeah. And I think that's the thing I've really, thank you, David, for sharing that, because that's the thing that's really struck me. I've seen that, struck me about 3 months ago where a lawyer, we do work a lot with lawyers and different, and when a lawyer called me and said, I'm a 7-year call, and I thought, that means she graduated 7 years ago from the bar, and she's been practicing for 7 years, and I thought, she's commoditized herself. She's one of whatever, so that's what I thought about that. Gary talked about this idea of takeaway from today is attention to career and career tools like resume should be a regular habit as not as needed. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I call it the Tim Hortons principle. The Roll Up the Rim campaign has been going since 1985, and they do it the same year, the same campaign. They never get bored of it. And why do they do that? You think it's to be lucky. On their end, it's so their franchisees can have consistent ability to buy new cars, new flat screen TVs, and make sure that their Visa cars are fully loaded to go anywhere they want in the world. And that's why they do it, is to create consistent revenue for their business, consistent clients, consistent opportunities flowing their way. And for you see it as a luck. For them, it's actually about removing all of the risk and all the uncertainty from their business by doing this in a very disciplined format. And I think that's really key. So questions you may have. Just a quick thing, as you know, with our partnership with your association, you get a 15% discount off everything you do with us. If you choose to do something, we have a number of different programs we can work with you one-on-one or with your organization. So you might want to bring us in your organization, or you yourself may have you may have needs. But whether you're looking for some help in your social media or you're looking for help on, maybe it's becoming a leader. We have a leadership identity program. We have a career identity program. We have job search programs. So we work. Everything we do is one-on-one, and we're like the Starbucks of our industry that way. And we also have 10 offices. Our offices go from Halifax to Vancouver. But we also can work with you for remote. So we had some people from Indiana and other places. We've got clients we work with one-on-one via phone and Skype. So that's the other advantage of the work we can do is it can be done anywhere, anytime. So I open this up for questions you may have about the market, about some of the things that I covered today, about anything that you wanted to clarify as it relates to this conversation. A couple of quick things. If you found today helpful, a couple things I would ask is connect with me on LinkedIn, as I mentioned. Please like our Facebook page if you found it helpful, and we'll be updating. We update on a regular basis different things that I'm speaking about or thinking about, and you'll get those right away. And or if you know of people that are, maybe your organization is going through restructuring or looking for some leadership support, then we do a lot of corporate work, as I mentioned as well. So if that's something. So the question was, can you speak to the use of Facebook by small business versus large entities? Yeah, I can speak to that. So let me pull this up here. I'll give you an example. And we are what I call a medium business. We're not small, we're not large. But how you can use Facebook is really, often what I'll do is I'm sharing content. So one, you want to build community on your Facebook page and get likes and get people to be community. But often what we do is we'll share whenever I write a column. So I write 3 columns a week: Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Monday is an original column of an article that I write originally, and Wednesdays and Fridays I pull together content. One on Fridays about leadership, and on Wednesdays about career management. So Wednesday's the Hump Day Report. Friday. So what we do is on our Facebook page is we post that content, and what happens is it goes virally. So example, in one of the yesterday's article we posted, almost 1,000 people have saw this post through the network, right? So there's an example where now we have many more people who know about us and are aware of what we do, and maybe we're, think of us. I think it's about building community. I mean, that's the other thing about Facebook is how do you start to create a conversation so you move to communities. And so it's putting up content, it's putting up interesting articles, it's maybe sharing videos or different things you think are quotes, but all around maybe the subject that you're a part of. And that's how we use it, to kind of make awareness within our community of the different ways that that we're involved in, and how we, sharing information. So sharing content is value added. It's not pitching. I mean, there obviously is always a pitch within it in the sense of what you could do for people, but what I'm very cognizant of is it something that people are going to get some value out of, not is it just a big, another way to advertise. And I think too many people see Facebook and Twitter and other things as all about advertising. And again, I think what Chris Hadfield does and what other people do that are smart brands is they don't advertise, they add value. And if you add value, then people want to know who you are and what you can do for them. That would be my big advice. Don't use it as basically as a page that you're advertising on, but using it as a page that you're asking questions, running polls, whatever it might be that you think could be of interest. The other thing is, too, for many people looking for an initial consultation, that's a 45-minute session with one of our coaches. So that's also a good way to connect with us and get the ball rolling if you just want to get some perspective maybe on your situation or what that looks like in everything we do. Another question. I recently connected to someone I knew at McGill. He's now working in a company I would like to approach eventually. Great opportunity to talk to him and ask him about it. But what about people I don't know? Where is the limit between showing interest about their company and simply knowing somebody? Yeah, that's a great question. Ideally, if you don't know them, that in your LinkedIn profile, that you do know them through somebody else. So again, yeah, there's this fine balance of stalking people professionally and reaching out. And the other thing I was saying, I didn't mention this, which I should have mentioned, is one of the other things is, most organizations and most associations have events. Get out to some of your events. That's the other advice I'd have to you. Get out to events, because often in events you could bump into people. But I might say, if the name of the company, you might say, who's the company you're interested in? Because I might suggest, do you know somebody who knows somebody that works there? And maybe try to get out and have a coffee meeting with somebody. And again, not with the idea of sending them my resume, I want to get a job, but more than the idea is I like to find out some more about what you guys are doing and what you're up to. And I think too many people approach sort of this whole sending out a resume, sending out a thing is getting, I need to get a job. And if there's no opportunities, then it's annoying. So that would be my advice. Another question is, how do you build a community? Good question, Peter. Well, I think you build community, Peter, by one, the content stuff. So I talked a little bit about posting content, but also you can by asking questions to your community. By one, you build community when you post content, because as they start to share it and they start to make comments and they start to like it, then you can start to create a conversation. So if somebody likes it, you can say thank you for the like, or you can say, or somebody makes a comment, that you respond to that comment and you start to create the community. And it's really, and then the other way you create community is by posting questions or posting up different things you're interested in, and asking community for perspective on things. That's another way to create community. And the other thing about create community itself, community will if it's true community, it's self-sustaining. I remember hearing that, talking about this as it relates to culture. When governments are too active in funding culture, then it's not culture anymore. Because culture is one of the key attributes of culture. It's a self-sustaining, that within the culture there's enough interest and value that people will want to invest in it. So that was a very interesting way. So it's self-sustaining. Yeah, so the other comment was, most professionals I know are not in Facebook, not unlike myself until most recently. Yeah, I think that's where, again, you can use LinkedIn. You can have LinkedIn pages on, so example, on LinkedIn, you can have LinkedIn pages as well, where you have your own company page on LinkedIn. So that's another way you can use LinkedIn as an example you have a company page. So you can have your own page on if you wanted to. That's another way you could do it instead of Facebook. We'll just put CareerJoy. You can I'll pull it over an example. You can use LinkedIn as a page. Oops, shoot. I'm sorry. Just looking at the community page. So you can also have this example where you're posting pages and people are following you. So that's another way that you can deal with this as well, as you can create community on a LinkedIn page, a company. So you can have a LinkedIn corporate page as well. Good. Any other comments or questions for today? Another question came is, what's your success rate like? Well, I think it's interesting. We're the only company in the country recommended to your association, but also to Queen's and Athabasca University and Bishops and OCAD and others, to their alumni, so not to students. So we've developed a really good reputation for doing really good one-on-one work. But obviously, we don't find people jobs, and we don't work with us and guaranteed career success happily ever after. But we see this over and over again. If you get good strategic career advice in a timely way, and it's thoughtful, then we see this over and over again, where people are getting the benefit of support that they didn't have before. So terrific. Okay, well, I'm recognizing the time, and we're running a bit over the hour, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to stay on if others have questions, but I'm also recognizing that many of you have to run out to meetings or whatever it might be. So if you if you know of people who are struggling with this question, who need help, then please let them know about what we do if you feel comfortable with what we talked about today. And in your network or your core organization, if they're looking for support, reach out to us. And my advice to you is just to work at this, to be diligent at it, but more importantly, do great work. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said about the 10-minute rule, is the other 7 hours and 50 minutes, or 8 hours and 50 minutes, or 10 hours and 50 minutes you're working that day, do good work. That's the bottom line. Do really, really great work. And if you do great work and do this, this is where the chaser is, right? This is where, just like Chris Hadfield, he's doing great work, and he's adding to it through telling the story in an interesting, engaging way. And that's the fundamental basis. You can't be doing all this stuff, and then pretending you're something you're not. That doesn't work anymore. So terrific. All right, well, have a great day, everyone. Thanks very much, and hope you found this really helpful. And yeah, have a terrific day. Cheerio.